Tencent among them. But now Beijing is seen to be fighting back a new law that restricts exports from Chinese firms to protect national security. Joining us now to discuss the implications of such a move is Shirley Yu, who's a political economist and Asia Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Shirley, always wonderful to have you with us on Bloomberg TV. So give us your thoughts, given that we did see the Standing Committee adopt this measure. To some extent, this is tit for tat, but there are enormous implications for these Chinese tech giants wanting to go abroad.
Oh, absolutely. Heidi, thank you for having me. Well, if you look at the NBC portal, it actually downplayed the significance of this export control law. It did say that, export control is a common practice by the United States and by the EU. So China is simply complying with global norms. But we all know it's a little bit more than that. But state media did come out and say that China is possibly going to use this export control law to act against offenders or abusers of export control rules that harms China's national security interest and national security law. And so now with that, it looks like China has launched this law as a defensive measure, not as a preemptive measure. And China seems to have established this as a second strike measure. It'll only strike back at countries who actually abuse the actual export control rules. But I must say, though, there is nowhere to be found with the name of the United States.
And Shirley, we are just hearing now Taiwan is set to tighten its tech transfer rules to Chinese companies, as according to the EDN. I am wondering how this landscape potentially changes if we get a change in the administration come November.
Well, China-U.S. Technological competition is going all out, as we could see, as you just mentioned, some of these best technology companies, they have been so much in the global headlines, Heidi, over the past couple of months. And with this export control law that China just published, there are some caveats, one of which is that it does say that it applies to all companies in China, including foreign invested ones. And we all know that Tiger Global, KKR, SoftBank, they are all investors in ByteDance. And so this would be by design to make sure that Chinese companies that are legally domiciled outside of China or companies that are foreign invested, they must comply to this export control law now from the law of the land. And so this technological competition is going to extend further into some of the leading Chinese technological companies. But I would say, though, it's rather than configuring, post the November, if administration is going to treat China differently, I doubt it. But at the same time, some of these leading Chinese companies, it's important to watch how they have been responding to the issue. Both Alibaba, I should say all Alibaba and Tencent and ByteDance, they have recently moved their headquarters to Singapore, and they are hiring hundreds of fintech talents and technological talents there, and they are trying to penetrate the entire ASEAN region. Well, ASEAN region is enormously interesting. This is a region that is certainly has a demographic advantage. It certainly is economically vibrant, but it welcomes technological innovation.
Sure.
So I think the ambitions of these Chinese global companies is not going to be dissipated by this U.S.'s position towards the Chinese tech companies, and they are going to continue to revert the directions, perhaps rather than going directly to the developed world, they are going to further penetrate the emerging world instead.
Shirley, the markets around the world are waiting for the third quarter GDP number for China, and it seems it's almost now like a battle. Growing fast isn't just about, oh, my economy's doing well, and invest in our companies. It's also about who's better. China fought the pandemic better. China is going to be going up the power structure now. We know GDPs can come and go. What context is? I guess what I want to say is, how big of a weapon is that for China, besides being something that their economy and their people badly need?
Well, China did have, relatively speaking, well, as you said, Kathleen, everything is relative these days. So it has been a remarkable recovery, I would say. We are possibly looking at a Q3 GDP somewhere coming in at 5.1 to 5.2% range. That's on the back of a 6.8 contraction in Q1 and a 3.2% growth on Q2. So within 3 quarters, that V-shaped recovery has been quite prominent. But this 5% range, also I should say though, from a long-term structural planning for China, it does set the Chinese economic growth in a very comfort zone, I think, today for the Chinese policymakers in terms of understanding not just relatively, how China is doing in 2020, but rather China's economic growth expectations within the decade of the 2020s, which is within 5 to 6% range. But I also want to say China does look at a lot of the domestic policy priorities, just as the world thinks, well, China is recovering better than us. China is actually, this year is a big year for China in the sense that China is finishing the 13th five-year plan, in which one of the key priorities is to double the GDP aggregate from the 2010 level. And so now China does need to grow 5.5% or so in order to accomplish that goal.